Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. And by my count, this is the 300th episode of Charts with Dan here on the channel. It is crazy how fast time flies. Today, we're going to be talking about Wuthering Heights and GOAT and all of the other movies that were at the box office this President's Day weekend. But before we get into any of that, it feels like we've had to do this for the last couple weeks. Every time I have a show, I have to start off with some sad news that broke yesterday, and that was the death of Robert Duvall, one of the best actors ever. He passed away at 95 years old. His film debut was in To Kill a Mockingbird, and for a lot of actors, that would be a tough act to follow. But he went on to appear in the late 60s and 70s in movies like True Grit, MASH, THX 1138, The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2, Network, and Apocalypse Now. He won an Academy Award for Best Actor for his role in Tender Mercies, and through the following decades, he went on to appear in movies like The Natural, Days of Thunder, Newsies, The Apostle, Sling Blade, Falling Down, Crazy Heart, so many to mention. He also appeared in the landmark miniseries Lonesome Dove. He was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, won 1, also won 2 Emmys, a BAFTA, and 4 Golden Globes. Robert Duvall was in some of the best movies of all time, and what I loved about him was he was very rarely the lead. Every once in a while he would be, but a lot of times he was just happy to be part of an ensemble cast. He never was trying to steal a scene. A lot of times he was the quiet power in every scene, and that's what made him one of my favorite actors. Anytime I saw Robert Duvall was going to be in a movie, I said, well, even if this movie isn't great, Robert Duvall is going to be great in this movie, and you can say that about so many actors, and I have said that about so many actors. In the statement announcing his death, his family said something that I thought was kind of poignant, and it seemed to fit the sort of person that it seemed like Robert Duvall was. His family said that in lieu of a memorial service, they encourage people to, quote, honor his memory in a way that reflects the life he lived by watching a great film, telling a good story around a table with friends, or taking a drive in the countryside to appreciate the world's beauty. And he certainly left a lot of great films for people to watch. And it does seem like we are at the end of an era. I mean, just in the last year, we've lost Diane Keaton, Gene Hackman, David Lynch, Robert Redford, now Robert Duvall, so many of these titans of the new cinema of the 1970s. Robert Duvall leaves such an amazing legacy of work. But of course, as always, my condolences go out to his friends, to his family, and to his fans. All right, let's take a look now at the box office for this President's Day weekend. And these are estimates because no matter what the holiday is, even if it's President's Day, which let's be honest, most people are working on President's Day, they still don't report final box office figures. So all we have is estimates for the weekend, but these are revised estimates that came out yesterday. So hopefully they're a little more accurate than what we got on Sunday. And let's start with the box office top 5. The number 1 movie, as expected, was Wuthering Heights with $32.8 million. And we're going to take a bit of a deep dive in just a few minutes into what that means for the movie. Was it a disappointment? Was it a success? We're going to look into the numbers a bit more, but quickly here, it was the 6th best opening for Margot Robbie, $32.8 million. That comes in behind Birds of Prey back in 2020. Margot Robbie's highest opening weekend, of course, is Barbie at $162 million, followed by Suicide Squad at $133.6 million. Then a big drop down to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood at $41 million. The Legend of Tarzan at $38.5 million. Birds of Prey and Wuthering Heights are at 5 and 6. The Suicide Squad is at number 7. That was so undercut by being released on HBO Max. Then we have Peter Rabbit at number 8. That's the first of 2 Peter Rabbit references this show, followed by Focus at number 9, and The Wolf of Wall Street at number 10 with $18.4 million, although it should be noted that that was a Wednesday release. Wuthering Heights did, however, have the top domestic opening of the year at $32.8 million, and this was an estimate that was actually going down all weekend. The second place movie was the second best opening of the year, and that was GOAT at number 2 with $27.2 million. It was the inverse of Wuthering Heights. Its estimate kept going up all weekend, and it's very likely that the final number is going to be even higher than what we see here. GOAT is from Sony Pictures Animation, and it was actually the 9th best opening ever theatrically for a Sony Pictures animation film, it is kind of ironic that maybe their biggest success ever, K-pop Demon Hunters, will not be on the box office charts. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, of course, is Sony Pictures Animation's biggest opening of all time at $120.6 million, followed by Hotel Transylvania 2, 3, and then 1. Then we have the Smurfs all the way back in 2011 at $35.6 million. The first Spider-Verse film, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, opened at $35.3 million. It is crazy how big of a leap it took from movie 1 to movie 2. Then we have the two Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs movies. Goat is at number 9, and Peter Rabbit is at number 10. That was a hybrid live-action animation, but it was Sony Pictures Animation Presents, so I put it here on the top 10. In third place was the new crime film Crime 101 at $14.2 million. Then we have Send Help dropping just 3%. There were very small drops for a lot of the movies that were out last weekend, and I think that's largely because the box office was so low last weekend due to the Super Bowl that a lot of the films that hung around made almost exactly the same amount this weekend as they did last weekend because there was an influx of people. There were more people going to the movies. So Send Help, with a very small drop at $8.8 million, it's now approaching a $50 million domestic total. And when we look at Sam Raimi's filmography, it is now on the top of the smaller films that Sam Raimi has made. It's at number 6 at $47.8 million, but it's about, a little less than $200 million behind Oz the Great and Powerful. We talked about this last week. There's sort of two Sam Raimis. And when you look at his films adjusted for inflation, Send Help is now on the list. It's at number 9, ahead of The Quick and the Dead, and a little less than $20 million behind Drag Me to Hell. At number 5 was the Kevin James film from Angel Studios, Solo Mio, which only dropped 7% and had a $6.5 million weekend. At number 6 was Zootopia 2, still in the top 10. A lot of people mentioned last week that I didn't take a note that Zootopia 2 has now been the 2025 release that's been in the top 10 the longest as far as movies released in 2025. And it dropped about 7%. It made another $3.7 million. Its total through Sunday was approaching $420 million. And this is a graphic we've been looking at for a long time, the race for number 1. And Zootopia 2 keeps closing in on a Minecraft movie. They're so close right now that this sort of long view graphic isn't very helpful. So this is a look at the last 2.5 weeks or so of these two films. And you can see, again, a Minecraft movie at this point in its release cycle was basically flatlining. It was at the end of its theatrical run. But Zootopia 2 is still doing well despite the fact that it came out in November, and it is closing that gap quickly. Unless it drops off a cliff, we may see Zootopia 2 pass a Minecraft movie this week. By the time that we do the show next week, we could have a new domestic box office champion for films released in 2025. We'll just have to stay tuned and see what's going to happen there. Good Luck, Have Fun, Don't Die opened in 7th place at $3.64 million. Then we have Avatar, Fire and Ash, basically flat from last weekend at $3.44 million. Iron Lung is at number 9 with $3.40 million and $37.5 million domestically. And 2026's Dracula rounds out the top 10 with a flat $3 million. Its total so far is $9 million. And a quick look at the 4-day numbers, at least these are the estimates we have right now. Wuthering Heights opening to $38 million. Goat very close behind because it has a much bigger estimated Monday than Wuthering Heights did. The kids that weren't in school, a lot of them going to see Goat. So it opens to a projected total of $35 million through 4 days. Crime 101 is in 3rd place at $16.37 million, followed by Send Help and Solo Mio. These are all basically in the same order. Zootopia 2 came in at $5 million for the long weekend, with Good Luck, Have Fun, Don't Die at $4.15 million, Avatar, Fire and Ash at $3.91 million, and Iron Lung and Dracula are the same numbers for the 4-day and the 3-day because there were no estimates available for Monday as of the time I was putting the show together. Dropping out of the top 10 this weekend, we have Shelter and Melania, both out of the top 10 after 2 weeks. Stray Kids, The Dominate Experience is out after 1 week, and The Strangers Chapter 3 tumbles out of the top 10 after 1 week. And looking at the biggest theater count changes this past weekend, Shelter dropped 1,720 theaters, so pretty much a 2-week guarantee for a lot of those venues. It's still in just over 1,000. The Housemaid dropped 890 theaters. Stray Kids, the Dominate experience, dropped a little over half of its theaters, 868, and I think it dropped about 95% from last weekend. This was obviously very much a one-weekend thing for most moviegoers. Melania dropped 799 theaters, and Avatar Fire and Ash got rid of a bunch of theaters, 715. It's still in 1,650. This is the 2026 box office versus the 2025 box office. And while I think we had a pretty good weekend overall, we were down 23.2% versus last year. And that's because Captain America Brave New World opened on this weekend last year. But honestly, without a major tentpole, I mean, I know Wuthering Heights drew some crowds, so you had an animated film, but dropping off from a Marvel movie to a movie that does not have a big franchise tentpole and only losing about 23% of your business year over year, I don't think that's too bad. I think it could have been a much worse scenario given the movies that were available this past weekend. So audiences did turn out to see what was offered to them this weekend. And let's talk a little bit more about the number one movie, which is Wuthering Heights. And it's one of those box office stories that can be a little tough to parse because depending on where you look on the internet, you'll get two completely different narratives about it. There are some stories that say that it was an absolute success over Valentine's Day weekend, a record-shattering debut. For the record, those records are not very impressive records. And there are some stories like this one from Forbes that say that Wuthering Heights was a box office disappointment this Valentine's Day weekend. So which one is it? Is it a huge record-shattering success or was it a disappointing debut? Well, as is often the case with box office stories, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. And a lot of the stories that have kind of focused on the idea that Wuthering Heights was a box office disappointment have been referencing these outlier box office projections that the movie was going to bring in $50+ million. There were some saying it could bring in $50 to $70 million. And they said, well, you know, some people were saying that it was going to make $50 million and it didn't. So that makes it a disappointment. But that $50 million projection was never really an industry standard. This was a story from Deadline going into the weekend saying that it was projected to make over 4 days $40 million. That was the official projection, maybe $50 million, they thought based on pre-sales, but the projection was $40 million, and it came in a little bit under that, but pretty close to it. Now, I think that there are some people that would say that because it didn't overperform and it came in a little under projections, that it's a disappointment. But we are talking about an $80 million film that opened to about, as we're going to see later on here in just a couple minutes, about $80 million worldwide. So if you open domestically to about half of your production budget, obviously not all of that money goes back to the studio, and you do a pretty good debut internationally, it's tough for me to sit here and say that Wuthering Heights was a disappointment. It came in on the lower end of projections, but it's not like it opened to $20 million or $25 million or even $30 million. That's where I think that you could start saying, oh, well, that was a real box office disappointment. I think that it had a pretty good opening when you look at how much it made versus its budget. I think that you can say that it was perhaps disappointing that we didn't have a huge breakout hit to kick off this Valentine's Day weekend, as we have seen so many times in the past, but that just wasn't in the cards for Wuthering Heights. The reviews were not particularly strong. It got a B cinema score, so there were many people in the audience that didn't feel like they got the movie that they were promised. And having seen the movie, I think that I would have to agree with that. It had potential perhaps to break out, but those elements just weren't present in the film. And instead, it performed basically to expectations, maybe a shade below. So for the opening weekend, I would not say that Wuthering Heights was a disappointment at the box office. I'd say that it came in as expected, but I'm also keeping a big eye on next weekend. Now, if we see a 60-70% drop on weekend number 2, that's when you can start the narrative of whether or not this movie is a box office disappointment. But even if it does fall off a cliff, the fact that it got off to the start that it did, the fact that there are so many ancillary revenue streams, I think that this is a movie that is going to be profitable in the long term because it didn't cost $100 or $120 or $125 million. Again, it was a reported $80 million budget. You add marketing on there. I'm not saying it's a blockbuster, but the thing about box office and really any kind of news right now is that you have to look for your angle. And when a movie is a huge hit or when a movie is a massive flop, those angles are easy to find. It tanked or it's a smash success. People want to read those stories. But I think when you have these in-between movies like Wuthering Heights, people kind of go in search of that narrative because that is what gets the engagement. You got to get them clicks. And, look at my channel, look at my numbers, look at my subscribers versus a lot of other movie channels. That's not necessarily what I'm here to do. I can promise you that this video about how Wuthering Heights had a, okay, pretty good debut. That's not the most exciting story in the world, but I think that that's the story that we're here to tell. So I'm just one analyst, and this is just my opinion, but looking at the numbers, would it have been nice to see Wuthering Heights get to $50-60 million? Sure, because that would be a good indicator of the overall health of the box office, and it would mean that more people were going to see the movie over the Valentine's Day/President's Day weekend, but I'm not going to label the film a disappointment just yet. I think we got to get into week 2 and week 3, look what the long-term picture of this film is before we can start making those proclamations. But, I think perhaps underwhelming could be applied to the film, but I would not say disappointing. We've got a lot more numbers to break down, but before we do, I want to thank the sponsor for this week's show, Chubbies. This video is brought to you by Chubbies. We are bearing down on the last cold weeks of winter. Grit your teeth, we're almost there. But let me tell you what I've been dreaming about. I've been dreaming about the day that I can throw these bad boys back on. These are my swim trunks from Chubbies. Ever since I got them, they have been my go-to if I'm going to the beach, if I'm going to the pool. The pool is more common considering that I live in Arkansas. But if I'm going swimming, I'm wearing these. I'm excited to get back in the warmer weather and enjoy some time in the sun. And spring break is going to be here before you know it. Chubbies swim trunks are engineered with 4-way stretch fabric that are perfect for an all-day swim party or just lounging by the pool. And they're also super soft. They don't have that scratchy synthetic feel that you get from the trunks that you might already have in your drawer. And Chubbies is celebrating 15 years in business with the return of their iconic original shorts, still designed for comfort and built for stretch. With over 2.6 million customers, Chubbies proves that great shorts never go out of style. For a limited time, Chubbies is giving viewers here on the channel 20% off with the code DanMurrell at chubbiesshorts.com. That's 20% off your order with the code DanMurrell at chubbiesshorts.com. Give your thighs the VIP treatment they deserve with Chubbies. And hey, while you're there, why don't you support the show and tell them that I sent you? And speaking of Wuthering Heights, that brings us to this week's Charts with Dan trivia question. When was the last time a direct adaptation of a classic novel, and for these purposes, let's say 100 years old or more, was number 1 at the domestic box office? Now, I'm not counting movies like The Little Mermaid, which are adaptations of Disney films that were based on classic novels. I mean a movie that was telling the story of a classic novel straight, even though Wuthering Heights, that's debatable. When was the last time one of those movies was number 1 at the domestic box office? This is always, of course, according to my research. I'll give you a second to think about it. But when I looked at the last several years of box office data, I came up with A Christmas Carol, which was a Disney film back in 2009, November 6th through the 8th, 2009. The other movies that I thought would have qualified were either written less than 100 years ago or, again, were adaptations of classic works. And that also brings us to our member poll from last week. I asked you, what classic novel should get the sexy treatment next? That was definitely how Wuthering Heights was sold. Whether it was received that way, that is debatable. And the winner running away was The Picture of Dorian Gray. A lot of people want to see a sexy Picture of Dorian Gray adaptation. 26 votes. At number 10 was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I'm not sure which one was going to be the sexy one in that one. Or listen, that opens the door to a lot of possibilities I don't want to get into. Tom Sawyer came in third with 8 votes, and there seemed to be some enthusiasm amongst those voters to turn it into a romance. I don't know, you might have to age up those characters. That might be kind of weird. Jane Eyre, another film from the Bronte sisters, comes in tied with Tom Sawyer at number 8. Don Quixote comes in at number 7. And a lot of people want to see Sexy Poirot at number 6. I mean, I don't know. I mean, Kenneth Branagh's got some appeal, but I guess you want to get like young, hunky Poirot. I don't know. Some interesting answers to that question there. All right, that brings us to this week's member poll question. This one's easy. It's a yes/no question. Do you think that Margot Robbie qualifies as an A-list star? We are in an era where the definition of a movie star seems to be changing. Box office appeal, not necessarily the number one indicator anymore. And so I want to know if you think that Margot Robbie could be called an A-lister. I certainly have my opinion. I don't want to tip the scale either way. I'll tell you next week. But do you think that she's an A-list star? If you're a member here on the channel, you can vote right now. You can vote yes or no. Those are your only two options. I'll reveal the results on next week's Charts with Dan. And if you're not a member here on the channel yet, we'd love to have you come and join the group. There may be a button for you to push that says become a member of the channel, depending on where you're watching this video, or you can definitely check the description down below. Not only do you get to vote in these member polls each and every week, but you also get early access to some of my videos. You get custom badges and emoji for the chat. So come hang out with all the other members here on YouTube, and your voice could be heard on this very important, pressing question. All right, let's turn now to the box office internationally. That's all markets outside of the US and Canada. And where Wuthering Heights may have come in at the lower expectation domestically, it actually exceeded expectations internationally. It brought in $42 million, which helped to kind of bolster that domestic number. GOAT comes in second place at $15.6 million, followed by Crime 101 at $12 million, Zootopia 2 bringing in $11.7 million, another sub 10% hold for Zootopia 2, and The Housemaid in fifth place, dropping almost 35% at $10.6 million. It should be noted that the Chinese New Year celebrations kick off, I believe, today. That is, of course, a massive movie-going time for people in China. We always see a huge influx of numbers in this international box office section. So on next week's show, we'll probably be looking at some big numbers from Chinese releases. Remember, Ne Zha 2, which went on to become the highest-grossing animated film of all time, debuted during this window last year, during the Chinese New Year. So we'll see if we can have another hit. I mean, honestly, if it was half as big, we would still be looking at a pretty massive breakout hit. When you take those international numbers, you combine them with our domestic numbers, we get the top 5 films worldwide, and Wuthering Heights opens officially for the 3-day weekend at $74.8 million, closer to $80 million over the 4-day weekend. GOAT comes in at $42.8 million, followed by Crime 101 at $26.2 million, Zootopia 2 at $15.4 million, and Send Help right behind at $15.3 million. Let's turn now to what I call our specialty charts here at the domestic box office, and we'll start with the top per theater averages. For the second week in a row, Pillion from A24, starring Harry Melling and Alexander Skarsgård, comes in at number 1. It expanded to 24 theaters and brought in just over $14,000 per theater. Then we have Wuthering Heights at $8,900 per theater in about 3,600, almost 3,700 theaters. Sirat, an Oscar nominee for Best International Film, in 7 theaters brought in just over $8,000. GOAT brought in just over $7,000 in 3,863 theaters, and Kokuho expanded to 5 theaters and brought in just over $5,000 per theater. Looking at the top films in limited release, at number 1 was Nirvana, the band, the show, the movie in 365 theaters. It brought in $1.25 million. That's pretty good for a movie in limited release. Pillion brought in $350,000. Shudder's latest film, The Mortuary Assistant, brought in just over $250,000 in 208 theaters. Scarlet brought in $212,000 in 530 theaters. I'm guessing a lot of those were IMAX theaters. And Back to the Past in 45 theaters brought in just under $135,000. This is what the 2026 domestic box office looks like as far as movies released since January 1st. Send Help is currently the number 1 movie of the year, although I think either Wuthering Heights or GOAT, or honestly both, will pass it by next week's show. Wuthering Heights is now the second highest grossing film domestically, followed by Iron Lung, which drops down 1 spot to number 3. GOAT debuts on the chart at number 4. Primate drops 2 spots to number 5. 28 years later, The Bone Temple drops 2 spots to number 6. Mercy drops 2 spots to number 7. Solo Mio moves up 1 spot to number 8. Greenland 2 Migration moves down 2 spots to number 9. Crime 101 enters the chart at number 10, and Shelter, Melania, and the re-release of The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, are now out of the overall 2026 domestic top 10. Looking at the domestic box office as far as all movies that are in theaters, so even ones that were released prior to January 1st, Avatar Fire and Ash remains the highest grossing film of the year at $146.3 million. Again, that's money made since the new year. Zootopia 2 is in second place at $82.7 million, followed by The Housemaid at $69.3 million. Marty Supreme is at $55.5 million, but it was pulled from a lot of theaters this past weekend. It looks like it's not going to get to $100 million, which would make it the first $100 million grosser from A24, but I will keep my eye on it. Send Help currently at number 5. Wuthering Heights is at number 6. Iron Lung is at number 7. Goat is at number 8. Anaconda's down 3 spots to number 9. Primates down 2 spots to number 10. And 28 years later, The Bone Temple and the SpongeBob movie, Search for SquarePants, are out of the top 10. So those are the box office numbers that I have for you. Before we go, though, I wanted to bring you the latest in the world of streaming. And we'll start with the latest numbers from Netflix. New ones will be out later today. This covers the week of February 2nd through February 8th. And the most watched program on Netflix globally was Bridgerton Season 4, which brought in 23.41 million views. The Investigation of Lucy Letby, a Netflix true crime documentary, comes in second place at 12.95 million views. Then we have the debut of The Lincoln Lawyer Season 4 with 9 million views. Durandar actually up 1 spot from last week with 8.16 million views. Even If This Love Disappears Tonight is at number 5. This is a South Korean film about a high school girl who loses her memory every time she goes to sleep. Sounds kind of like 50 First Dates, but it's actually a remake of a Japanese film of the same name. It brought in 7.81 million views. Then we have The Rip at number 6 with another 7.38 million views. His and Hers is at number 7. K-pop Demon Hunter sticking around the top 10 for another week. This thing came out in June, and it's still here at just over 6 million views. In the Land of Saints and Sinners, a non-Netflix original movie starring Liam Neeson, comes in at number 9 with just over 5 million views. And at number 10 is the Netflix series Unfamiliar, which is from Germany. It's about 2 married ex-spies on the run. And I think that if you analyze Netflix original programming, I think 35% of what's on Netflix is about ex-spies on the run. These are the most watched programs on Netflix in 2026. The Rip is now over 100 million views. His and Hers is at 83.78 million views. Bridgerton Season 4 is now up to number 3 with, I think, 2 chunks of season left. It's at 63 million views. People We Meet on Vacation down at number 4 with 54.32 million views. Then we have K-pop Demon Hunters, the 5th most watched program on Netflix since January 1st. That's pretty impressive, or actually I believe since January 5th, which is when I started counting this. Kidnapped, Elizabeth Smart's at number 6. Runaways at number 7. Seven Dials is at number 8. Stranger Things Season 5 is at number 9. And Can This Love Be Translated? The series from South Korea is at number 10 at 19.68 million views. Let's take a look now at the latest numbers from Nielsen. Now, these are delayed by about a month, and they are domestic numbers only. They're not global numbers like we just saw from Netflix. These are the numbers from January 12th through the 18th, which was the debut week of The Rip, and it was the most watched streaming movie on Netflix that week, with 23.2 million hours watched. People We Meet on Vacations in second place. Edgar Wright's The Running Man debuts in third place with 6.3 million hours watched. Then we have the Stranger Things making of film One Last Adventure at number 4 at 5.11 million hours watched. K-pop Demon Hunters in the top 5 at 4.9 million hours watched. Right behind is Suitcase Killer, which I believe is another true crime documentary, followed by One Battle After Another at number 7, Zootopia at number 8, Soul on Fire hitting the charts at number 9, and The Bad Guys there at number 10. These were the most watched streaming shows for January 12th through the 18th. His and Hers jumps up to number 1 at 37.4 million hours watched. Stranger Things is at number 2. Landman is at number 3. The Pit, I believe this is an all-time high as far as hours watched for The Pit. It was at 19.3 million hours watched at number 4. 11/22/63 is at number 5 at 16.1 million hours watched, followed by The Closer at number 6. The Traitors returns to the charts at number 7 at 14.8 million hours watched. Fallout's at number 8, Bluey's at number 9, and Grey's Anatomy back on the charts at number 10. Now, for the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've had several comments asking about Heated Rivalry and why it is not on these Nielsen charts. And the simple answer is it comes down to how Nielsen categorizes shows. They categorize shows in 2 different buckets. They have original programming and acquired programming. Original programming is considered to be stuff that is made directly for streaming. Acquired programming is stuff that has either aired in the past or airs on some sort of network. and then goes to a streaming service. And because Heated Rivalry was not made directly for HBO Max, it's considered acquired programming, which means that when it comes to watch time, it is up against the juggernauts like Bluey and Grey's Anatomy and NCIS and Big Bang Theory. It's much harder to make the top 10, which is all that Nielsen reports. It reports the top 10 original and the top 10 acquired shows. It's much harder to make the acquired top 10, especially if you're a show that doesn't have a whole lot of episodes, doesn't put up as much runtime. I believe that is why we have not seen Heated Rivalry here. It's just because of categorization. I would love to see the Nielsen numbers for the show on a week-to-week basis. It's just not in that top 10, which is why you're not seeing it here on the show. Looking at the top shows as far as watch time per available episode, His and Hers really crushed it with 6.23 million hours per episode. This is where you take the total watch time and divide it by the number of episodes you can watch. Seven Dials comes in second place with just over 2 million hours per episode. Then we have 11/22/63 at 1.8 million hours per episode, Landman at 1.48 million hours per episode, The Pit at 1.14 million hours per episode, Fallout at just over 1 million hours per episode. Then a bit of a drop off to Stranger Things at 758,000 hours per episode. Runaway at number 8. The Traitors coming in at 362,000 hours per episode. And Tell Me Lies, which was spinning up a new season, is at number 10 at just over 300,000 hours per episode. And that does it for this week's show. Before we go, though, as always, I just wanted to flag a few things that you might be interested in watching this upcoming week, both at home and in theaters. First of all, today, Tuesday, the SpongeBob movie, Search for SquarePants, is available to stream on Paramount Plus. And then a film called Urchin that I've heard some really good things about, I believe it debuted at Cannes last year, is available to stream on Hulu. 28 years later, The Bone Temple is also available on premium video on demand and for digital purchase today, alongside Mercy and No Other Choice. And Kill Bill, The Whole Bloody Affair. The combined version of both Kill Bill movies is also now available for purchase, which is kind of ironic because I think in the lead up to the release of The Whole Bloody Affair, Quentin Tarantino was saying that he just wasn't sure about a home release, and here we have it available digital only. There's not even, that I can find, a physical copy available for it. So he kind of went from being the film-only guy to the digital-only guy for this version of Kill Bill. That was honestly probably a deal that he had to make with the distributor so that they could get more money besides just box office revenue. Tomorrow on Wednesday, Rental Family starring Brendan Fraser, which I enjoyed. It wasn't on my top 10 list last year, but it's a really cute movie. You should check it out. It'll be streaming on Hulu. On Thursday, the newest season of The Night Agent debuts on Netflix. Then on Friday, in theaters and select markets, you can catch the Oscar-nominated short. So if that is on your list of things to watch before the Academy Awards, check your local listings starting on Friday. Entering wide release on Friday, we have a few movies. The first one is How to Make a Killing. Glenn Powell, because it's been a couple months since he was in a movie, plays a wannabe heir who has to wipe out his other family members in order to claim a multi-billion-dollar fortune. The writer-director of this film, John Patton Ford, his last movie, Emily the Criminal, was very good, so it might persuade me to check this one out. I Can Only Imagine 2 hits theaters this weekend, which continues the real-life story of Christian artist Bart Millard after the breakthrough hit of the song from the first movie, I Can Only Imagine. That's how sequels work. Also hitting wide release this weekend is the film Psycho Killer. It's about a woman who pursues her husband's killer, only to find out that he's a psycho killer. Andrew Kevin Walker, who wrote Seven, also wrote this movie. This Is Not a Test will also be entering theaters nationwide this upcoming week. It's about a group of high school kids who shelter from the end of the world. In IMAX release this upcoming weekend is Epic, Elvis Presley in concert. It sounds very interesting. Director Baz Luhrmann, while he was making Elvis, the movie starring Austin Butler, unearthed this treasure trove of concert footage and decided to remaster it and make a kind of hybrid concert film / documentary. So it gets 1 week in IMAX release, and then it will be made available to other theaters, I believe, next weekend. And in limited release this upcoming weekend is a film called The Dreadful, which reunites Sophie Turner and Kit Harington in a horror film set in medieval England. And then on Monday, almost a week from now, Paradise Season 2, which performed really well last year, will be making its debut on Hulu. And that's all I've got for you this week. Thank you so much for listening to all of these different numbers week in and week out for 300 episodes and hopefully 300 more. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please hit that subscribe button, hit the bell so you're notified when I upload new videos. And hey, you know what? While you're at it, why not tell your friends? Thanks to Chubby's for sponsoring this video, but most of all, thanks to you for watching it. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.